Along Wisconsin's northern coast, rivers draining the land flow into the cold, blue waters of the freshwater sea, Lake Superior. Their waters mix and mingle in shallow coastal wetlands called freshwater estuaries. Just as Lake Superior shapes them, the estuaries in turn influence the lake through the quality of the water they send her in a dynamic relationship that affects the people, wildlife, and plants of the region. Like a string of pearls, freshwater estuaries grace Lake Superior's sweeping shoreline. Each estuary is a unique treasure, a pearl, connected by the waters of Lake Superior, and each tells a story best shared by the people who cherish them. Called the Everglades of the North, the Kakagon-Bad River Estuary is protected and managed by the Bad River Band of the Lake Superior Chippewa Indians. The waters of the Kakagon and Bad Rivers meet Lake Superior, creating one of the largest undeveloped wetland complexes in the upper Great Lakes. Look closely at this sea of grass. It is the spirit of the Anishinaabe, or Ojibwe people, who migrated here centuries ago from the east, looking for a place where food grew on the water. The food they found was wild rice, and the place they made their home was Chequamegon Bay.
The meaning of the rice and the waters, it goes way back. And to protect those with the waters and in Lake Superior and the fresh waters, the water is the blood life of Mother Earth, the same as with us. Our people came here because of this. They were to go where the food grows in the water, and that is where we are here.
The mixing of the river water with Lake Superior makes change a natural state in all estuaries. But not all change is natural. The Anishinaabe people's way of life and their relationship with the wild rice is threatened today by unregulated shoreline development and power boats that churn up the fragile rice beds.
It's really hard to protect the wild rice because we don't have jurisdiction over the rice. And from what I have seen from when I was a little girl to today, we have like 40% left. This is how it used to be here when I was a girl, that when you turned around, the canoe or the boat touched both sides. And now you can get 4 of those boats down there in the Suez. That was all rice at one time. And it's not that way anymore.
The Kakagon-Bad River Estuary would not exist today except for the Bad River tribe's careful stewardship and protection.
We help the people to see what's really taking place here and how we constantly have a struggle to protect what is sacred for us, for our children and for future generations. You know, this is our responsibility.
The story of the Fish Creek Estuary is one of change.
Welcome to the Fish Creek Estuary. It's kind of a unique location, and sort of like the location where the rivers meet Lake Superior and the connection between the two. We're standing right here in the middle of the western end of the Fish Creek Slough. The slough is kind of a unique spot because it's the bottom of a river and the materials that are carried down the river meeting the Lake Superior coastline. And we call, in fancy terms, this the coastal estuary. This Fish Creek Slough is an extremely important area for the European settlers when they entered this area. It was used as a transport and a storage location for the log cut that occurred before the turn of the century.
More than 47 million board feet of timber, cut from virgin pine forests, were flushed down Fish Creek. The logs ripped away the natural stream banks. Without its protective forest canopy, the red clay and sandy soils eroded into Fish Creek with each rain. The logging era forever altered the estuary. Not all changes within the estuaries are caused by humans. Some are natural and just as dramatic.
Gradually over time, we're getting deeper water depths in the lower part of the Fish Creek estuary, and we're also getting this sort of water movement between Lake Superior and the estuary is constantly moving in and moving out, and it sort of acts in a sawing motion, keeping them deep and clean of sediments. And that creates a number of fingers or old river channels. Those fingers are really important to the change of water in the lower part of an estuary. And that also creates unique habitat for northern pike. And there's probably 30 or 40 other species that have a strong connection between the estuary and the nearshore areas.
Another water change unique to Lake Superior's estuaries, called a seiche, is caused by wind and barometric pressure affecting the lake. A seiche pushes lake water upstream into an estuary and temporarily raises water levels. The fluctuations work like a tide, but usually occur in cycles lasting less than an hour. Seiches constantly soak and dry portions of the estuary, creating unique opportunities and niches for animals to find food resources not present in inland wetlands. Fish Creek continues to change.
About 1980, the Department of Natural Resources realized that we needed to purchase some of this property as the state of Wisconsin and set it aside so that we don't make these intrusions again. And we now own a fairly large portion of the coastal estuary, which means that it probably won't change significantly for, I hope, 5 or 6 generations. So the changes that we see occurring in the estuary in the future are expected to be these normal changes, the fluxing of the estuary back and forth, its relationship between the stream and the lake, and not the intrusions of man.
European immigrants came to farm the cutover lands around Whittlesea Creek. Crops and pastures replaced the virgin white pine forest. Not until the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service established the Whittlesea Creek National Wildlife Refuge has there been a chance to restore this estuary and a native fish species that disappeared from its waters.
Where we are is at the Whittlesea Creek National Wildlife Refuge, which is our 522nd refuge in the nation. And what's so special about it is it's one of the estuaries or coastal wetlands at the head of the Chequamegon Bay. We have some really incredible restoration opportunities here at Whittlesea Creek because there's been some really drastic land use changes within the creek itself and also in the watershed. One of the things that's happened with Whittlesea Creek is in the early 1950s, U.S. Corps of Engineers came in and they straightened and dredged the lower end of Whittlesea Creek.
This channelizing of Whittlesea Creek was intended to drain its wetlands for farming and to prevent flooding. But speeding up the flow of water off the land caused more erosion.
And so what that's done is it's changed the morphology of the stream, and we no longer have as many of the nice gravel beds in the stream as we used to have, which are really important for the spawning trout and salmon. But it's something that we have to deal with within the stream itself to slow down some of that sand deposition.
With the restoration of Whittlesea Creek comes the opportunity to reintroduce a species once native to its waters.
The coastal brook trout is one of those fall spawning brook trout that is not like a typical resident brook trout which spends its entire life in the stream. It spawns in the stream and then spends the rest of its lifetime in the lake because it doesn't have to battle the cold temperature, it doesn't have to battle the current like a resident brook trout does. Those brook trout get nice and big. In about the late 1800s, as far as we know, they're basically fished out of the Wisconsin waters of Lake Superior. So what we're hoping to do is to do an experimental reintroduction in Whittlesey Creek to see if we can restore at least part of the population in Wisconsin. So we think that the potential for restoring the watershed is also really good because the runoff should be slowing down over time as some of those farm fields begin to grow up into trees and shrubs. But one of the things that we need to also do besides just restore the stream itself is restore areas in the watershed and work with landowners on keeping some of the watershed area in as much of a natural state as possible.
For over 100 years, people have used the Sioux and Onion rivers. Now, local citizens are taking the lead to restore and protect them.
This place is the Sioux River and the Onion River rivers coming together to create this incredible complex. Behind me is the Onion River, and a couple miles down the beach is the Sioux River, and the two are kind of the borders for this wetland area that I guess is the home to a lot of incredible wildlife. There's 100 square miles that flows in to the Sioux River and the Onion River, and that's a lot of citizens. There's about 610. We've contacted these people through newsletters, and we've had town meetings to begin discussing with the townships and the DNR what to do with this land and how to preserve it. I guess because it's such a cool place, there's so many people who want to come visit it, and we worry about the impact of so many people and realize that there needs to be some real land use planning done for this area. One particular issue that we'll be looking at through this land use process is the parking situation. And right now we just have a road cut up to the beach, which is not only a safety hazard, but it's rough on this wetland. One of the problems or issues we've had with this area is that we don't know what it used to look like. We don't even know what's here to save it. And so one of the initiatives of the Inland Sea Society has been to start this marsh monitoring program, which brings citizens in to monitor the frog life and the bird life, are two specific ones. It's a really, really special place, and I think all of us want to save it and keep it safe.
Suspended from Lake Superior's southern shore lie an archipelago of 22 islands. They have been a traditional home of the Anishinaabe or Ojibwe people, a center for the fur trade industry, a magnet for commercial fishing, beacons for ships traveling the lake, and a resource for logging and quarrying. Now, 21 of these islands are protected as the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore. An unexpected feature on Madeline, Outer, and Stockton Islands are freshwater estuaries. 5,000 years ago, a large sandbar connected Stockton to a smaller island. When Lake Superior's water level dropped about 2,500 years ago, the sandbar was exposed, forming a sand bridge, or tombolo. The tombolo borders the Stockton Island estuary, creating uncommon habitats where many rare plants and animals converge.
We're within several steps of about 6-7 different types of plant communities. The open water there is an interdunal pond, part of the lagoon. That's part of the estuary. The water draining off of Stockton Island and getting ponded up in between the old beach ridges. That's surrounded by a bog with pitcher plants and cranberries and sundews and several different types of orchids. And it's an area that's dominated by a couple different types of pine trees, red and white pine, but it's so sandy and so dry that the pine trees cannot grow close together. They're very widely spaced apart in a savanna type of a situation. And there's lots of blueberries and huckleberries and a number of different types of heath plants that are adapted to that dry environment.
A variety of forest types, including pine, boreal, and hemlock hardwood, form the backdrop for the Stockton Island estuary.
So even though we look around us today and see some pretty mature forests, it doesn't mean that the islands had never been logged. But in most cases, it's been 30, 50, 80, and maybe even 100 years since the intense logging activity has passed. So the estuary areas have had a chance to recover, as has most of the rest of the islands. It's turned into a very pristine type of a situation for these wetlands.
Stockton Island and its unique estuary are accessible by watercraft and offer many opportunities for recreation, education, exploration, and research.
Even though this tombolo has been here for about 2,500 years, the lake level in this area is slowly rising as a result of the rebound from the glaciers. And the north shore of Lake Superior is rebounding faster than the south shore, so the south shore of the lake is basically being slowly inundated by water. And that's what creates a lot of these estuaries, these bogs, these lagoons and ponds. And because of that relative rise in the lake level, it's slowly whittling away the size of the tombolo. And so we're measuring the speed at which that happens. It's not going to disappear anytime soon, but given another 2,500 years, we may have a lot smaller campground.
Where the eastern estuaries of Wisconsin's north coast are dominated by wild rice, cattails, and marsh grass, the western estuaries have a more bog-like character, with plants and animals not commonly found in other wetlands. The Red Cliff Band of the Lake Superior Chippewa preserve the Raspberry River estuary for traditional uses and protect it against threats to its sustainability.
Historically, the Raspberry Bay estuary has always been important to the Red Cliff tribe and to the Red Cliff tribal people because of its importance with wild rice, with the fish and the wildlife that have also been associated with this area. They've been linked to this river for many, many years, and just in talking to these elders, we've learned that and found out how important this estuary is. Part of the reason that the Raspberry estuary is so unique is due to its bog-like tendencies and the plant communities that are associated with that, like the pitcher plants, the wild cranberries. The benefits of a healthy estuary ecosystem, such as we have here at the Raspberry system, well, number one would probably just be the aesthetic beauty. Cleansing effect of the water coming into the estuaries, and the cleansing effect of the estuary itself, the vegetation cleaning the water and cleaning some of the impurities out of the water to replenish this water as it goes back into Lake Superior, and just providing new nutrients and new food sources for the plants and animals that are in the estuary. Sedimentation is a major problem along most of the systems that we deal with, and I think along the Bayfield Peninsula it's a major problem. A lot of that is due to us, to humans, and to the changes that we've made over the years with different developments along these river systems. The road systems, of course, everybody wants to build a house on the lakefront, everybody wants to be on a stream, and when we do that and we're destroying the habitat along the streams or the buffer zones along these streams, we're also ruining this fragile ecosystem. For all the estuaries around the lake and around the bay, if we want to continue to see them functioning and producing the way they do now, we need to definitely consider some restrictive measures to protect the estuaries and the surrounding land, and also to reduce the sedimentation levels. If we can do that, then hopefully they'll continue to be productive systems and we'll continue to reap the benefits of areas like this.
The Sand River estuary is one of Lake Superior's most secluded. The watershed is forested and undeveloped. Most of the Sand River estuary and all of the nearby Little Sand River estuary lie within the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore. Both offer park visitors the opportunity to experience these coastal wetlands.
The estuaries of Lake Superior are important as indicators of the health of the entire ecosystem, the entire basin of Lake Superior. They indicate how we are using our land, how we are treating the water. As a coastal manager, I'm interested in the economic benefit that these resources can bring, the sustainable economic viability that we'll see in the region.
Estuaries like the Sand River add to the sustainability of the region's economy by offering a place for water-based recreation and tourism. Protecting critical habitat and water nurseries ensures the health of fish populations for commercial and sport fishing.
We need to develop a strategic vision for the estuaries. We need to be sensitive to the current land ownership patterns, but still provide those opportunities for people to see the estuaries. People need to see and feel the estuaries in order to really appreciate their value. And once they appreciate their value, they too are going to want to preserve the resource.
The flow of not one, but 3 lost creeks mixing with Lake Superior creates this estuary. A unique feature of the Lost Creek estuary is the impact on it of Lake Superior's Seiche effect.
The Lost Creek estuary is the smallest estuary on Lake Superior. It's only 320 acres, but yet it's one of the most diverse estuaries, and it has over 14 species of rare plants and animals that are located here. The reason that causes diversity is the fact that the water can come out of the lake and come up into the estuary. And that flushes the estuary as the water is going back and forth, and it changes the pH value. There's a big bog in here, and like most bogs, the pH will keep going down and down and down, but because of the water coming in from the lake rises up into the bog and then drains back out again, the pH stays fairly high, and this allows a greater variety of plant species to grow. Okay, we have a coastal bog here, we have a coastal fen, we have a coastal marsh, and we have the open lagoon area. The bog is where the sphagnum moss accumulates and grows out over the top of the water, where many species of animals have a place to hide and live underneath it. The fen is a grassland, and we have a real nice division line out in the bog that you can see where the sphagnum moss ends and the grassland begins. As we get to more open water, then we have a cattail area, and these make up the marshes. The open lagoon, of course, has a whole new series of plants and animals, just like the open lake. The northerns move up into the lagoon out of the lake. We have walleyes, and we have perch. We have the tall white bog orchid, which grows in our bog here, which is only found in a very few sloughs in all of Wisconsin. We also have the Arethusa, just a beautiful one. We saw water arums, we see pink lady slippers. There's just all kinds of diversity in the plant life. So we have every habitat perennial which is found in northern Wisconsin in this one little 320 acre area, and that's what I think really makes it unique. So I'm hoping that that third of this estuary that is still in private ownership could get purchased and put into the estuary to be preserved forever.
From the time that mile-high glaciers covered this land to today, the impact of Lake Superior's fluctuating water levels has been etched on the landscape at Bark Bay.
Change occurs in a number of different temporal scales, and of course the big change was the fact that the glaciers left. Prior to that time, there was what we call a proglacial lake, and we were standing here, we'd be under about 400 feet of water. The glaciers left, and the outlet changed, and the waters receded, and it left a system somewhat like today.
Water levels at Bark Bay were once 10 to 15 feet higher than they are now. Old barrier beach ridges mark the former points where Lake Superior lapped up on the land.
This is what we call a coastal wetland complex. and it's complex in the sense that it has a number of different vegetation types. We're on the peatland part, but if we looked all back in this direction, we would find that there's a river coming in, the Bark River, that drains into the system from the upland, and it finds an outlet to Lake Superior. So when the water levels in Lake Superior change, generally that water backs up. And so some people call these barrier beach coastal wetlands, some people call them freshwater estuaries, and I like the name freshwater.
Partially protected as a state natural area, the Bark River estuary is called a pulse-stable community. The natural cycle of Lake Superior water levels rising and falling creates a pulse. The vegetation may advance or retreat based on water levels, but the system remains a wetland.
All systems change. Change is inevitable, right? But what's the rate of change? Of course, the question is, are humans speeding up that process? The difference between a natural eutrophication or enrichment of an area and what we call cultural eutrophication is something we ought to know. Is if we're pushing this wetland in a direction that it's something that it was, we should know that. What we really need here is an ongoing monitoring effort. If we find a few exotic plants coming into the system, it's a lot easier to do something with them, take them out, when there's only 2 or 3 stems, and as opposed to when it's sort of taken over a quarter acre. We've got, for example, a large clone of giant reed grass. The Latin name is Phragmites. People assume that it probably only got here about 100 years ago. Is it taking over this wetland? First of all, what's the rate of its advance? Second of all, are we affecting that advance? So that poses the question, how much use is possible in a system like this? And if we have systems where we like to get people out here and to understand the system, be educated about the processes, and just enjoy the out of doors. That's part of the reason we'd like to protect these areas for the long term. But there's a bit of a balance we have to figure out. I mean, is there a limit on the use in these systems? And so part of the research might be from that sort of cultural side.
The Flag River estuary works hard for the community of Port Wing. Its lower reaches are a popular marina for commercial fishermen and boaters. A slice of remnant boreal forest with trees approaching old-growth size stand on the old beach ridges flanking the estuary. Both the Flag and neighboring Cranberry River share common origins in the Barrens, a sand and clay upland south of Lake Superior. As they meander through hills and ravines, their water flow is fed by many springs and from surface runoff. These rivers, especially the Flag, were once known as excellent spawning areas for brown and rainbow trout.
Loved northern Wisconsin for a place to live, and I was a sportsman and a fisherman all my life, and I came up here and I got acquainted with the Cranberry River and the Flag River by fishing them, and you can't compare what we have today in those rivers to what we had back then. The rivers have changed from being a very, very excellent trout streams, both of them, to mediocre rivers at the present time. Years ago, when they did their logging up in that country up there, they did it with horses and so forth, and then the increase in modern machinery and logging equipment, it just increased and increased, and they cut off so much so fast. They overlooked the fact that what was going to happen to the earth underneath it. It caused a tremendous amount of erosion. If you compare the earth in the bottom of the stream now to what it was back in, say, the 50s, it's no comparison at all. It's the silt in the bottom of the streams is more or less a mixture of clay and sand, and it's mud, and it's filled in all the holes where the fish used to stop and spawn, and it's made a tremendous difference.
Erosion of sediments into the Flag River estuary isn't just a problem for spawning fish species. It causes navigational problems for commercial and sport fishermen. The Port Wing Harbor, at the mouth of the Flag River estuary, is regularly dredged to remove the sediment load that is flushed into it from its headwaters.
We've got to do something to hold the water back when we get these heavy rains, like building an earthen dam with an outlet that will let this water out in a period of 4 or 5 days so it doesn't damage the creek below. That's the only way that I see that we're going to get these two rivers back.
Intertwined with the neighboring St. Louis River, the story of the Nemadji River estuary has as many dramatic twists and turns as the river itself. Early travelers of Lake Superior knew to keep the Nemadji River, Ojibwa for left-hand river, on their left when coming into port to avoid being grounded in its shallow estuary at Eloise Bay. This watershed's red clay soil gives the Nemadji its characteristic color and its tendency for erosion and flash flooding. Despite its muddy appearance, the water quality is excellent for fish and wildlife.
The Nemadji River was a very important resource for early development. There was a lot of logging activity that took place in the upper Nemadji watershed, and the Eloise Bay area was a perfect place to capture the logs and put them into a large area that they referred to as log booming areas, because the logs came straight down the Nemadji. They didn't have to be risked out in transportation out on Lake Superior. And the south end of Eloise Bay, which now when we look at it, it's all relatively undeveloped. It looks like it may never have been developed, but back in the latter part of the 1800s, there was a large sawmill operated by the Empire Logging Company, and the whole bottom of the bay is probably covered with slab logs. Today we use the Eloise Bay area for a large amount of recreation. We have the shipping interest still readily there. The Duluth Superior Port is the largest Great Lakes port. It's primarily with coal and iron ore and somewhat grain. So the importance of water transportation has not changed in this area. Now we're at a point where people no longer remember what we had 30 years ago. They don't remember the floating sludge mats, they don't remember the fish kills, they don't remember the stench that we had off our rivers below paper mills and wastewater treatment plants, because all those things have been taken care of and repaired. We now have a resource that has gone from one of the most severely degraded resources to one that is prized by virtually everybody that lives on its watershed and uses it. In 1992, we had a large railroad derailment upstream near the Highway 35 bridge at the railroad trestle, where a railroad car fell off the trestle and landed smack dab in the middle of the river, and it caused a large release of materials containing benzene and other aromatic hydrocarbons as a pollutant.
The spill forced the largest evacuation of a population center in United States history. However, it was the Nemadji's tendency to flood that saved the day. An intense rain began shortly after the spill, and the Nemadji River flushed the tainted water downstream, away from populated areas, into the estuary, and out to Lake Superior, where the chemicals were broken down by sunlight and evaporation. While wildlife and fisheries sustained damage, human tragedy was avoided. The estuary has since recovered. Another twist in the Nemadji's story occurred in January 2003, when a pipeline near the river ruptured, spilling some 90,000 gallons of crude oil on the frozen river. Once again, environmental disaster was averted, as the ice effectively sealed the river from direct contamination, allowing it to be more easily cleaned up. Invasive species upset the natural balance of Lake Superior's estuaries. Zebra mussels, ruff, and the round goby threaten native fish populations. Purple loosestrife and Eurasian water milfoil crowd out native plants and reduce habitat.
We have a reluctance for people just to put money into environmental protection because they don't see the problem that we had 30 years ago. So we've done a great job as humans living on the shore here to first come in and really muck it up, and then finally come to a point of recognition that we've really damaged an important resource here and we have something really valuable that we can restore. We've restored it, and now we're at a point that I'm not sure everybody is aware just what we've achieved and whether people are willing to put the money and resources into maintaining it.
The twin port cities of Superior, Wisconsin and Duluth, Minnesota are one of the largest freshwater seaports in the world. They also are home to one of Lake Superior's largest freshwater estuary complexes, rivaled only by the Bad River Kakagan Sloughs. Downstream from the historic Ojibwa community at Fond du Lac, meaning head of the lake, the St. Louis River slows and spreads its waters, creating a 21-mile-long, 12,000-acre estuary. A popular water highway for Native Americans and early fur traders, the St. Louis estuary was dredged to accommodate modern shipping. Lumbering, iron mining, smelting, the river became a pipeline for industry to export the region's abundant natural resources. The mills and smelters are now gone. However, the ghosts of a less environmentally aware past still haunt the estuary. The St. Louis River Citizens Action Committee is a key partner in the plan to restore the estuary.
The St. Louis River Estuary, in particular the development of the Lower St. Louis River Habitat Plan, really has seen some significant partnerships. The project started back in the late 1980s, and literally hundreds of people have come together. We have over 54 different agencies all coming together to work on the St. Louis River, either for habitat issues or the remediation of the contaminated sediments. The St. Louis River Estuary is the nursery for the fisheries of western Lake Superior. It's also being the western point of the Great Lakes, and so we have the funneling of all the migratory birds. We have over 230 species that have been documented either migrating through or nesting or breeding in this area. It is a highly industrialized harbor, and up the estuary there were 18 mills during the turn of the century, very industrialized, but it also retains a lot of high quality habitat. And back in the late 1970s through the mid 80s, when our wastewater treatment plants came online, it really did a lot for cleaning up and bringing the dissolved oxygen levels up. And so in the last 50 years, we've gone from being an extremely depleted area to being a world-class fisheries.
Today, it is not industrial development, but changing land use patterns that threaten direct loss of habitat and increase erosion and sedimentation.
So each day that you're on the river, it's a little bit different, and that's probably one of the main reasons to be passionate, but it's also part of that thriving community. There are 92 industries along the St. Louis River, 200,000 people living with 230 species of birds and 43 species of fish. They're all working together, and that's what's good, is we've got industry and we've got people and we've got habitat and we've got wildlife and we've got it all working together.
The St. Louis River Estuary is the heart of this region, and it captures the hearts of the people who live near its waters.
The way I feel about the river is, this is my river, and I want people to take care of it, and I'm grateful for the states of Minnesota and the states of Wisconsin for trying to do this, and I applaud them for their efforts.
And I still have an opportunity to come out here and see something like this and feel feel the impact of its presence in my life, and be able to share something like this with people, and realizing that they are also touched in the same way.
All this is really close to our population where we live and work, and Hopefully, 150 to 200 years from now, this could be here for people to see and use.
We have a vision of a thriving human community connected to the aquatic and terrestrial habitats of the St. Louis River. And so the goal is working together for a viable ecosystem.
Over 20 freshwater estuaries mark the shoreline of Wisconsin's northern coast. They all have experienced many changes. Only now are we beginning to appreciate the function and importance of these unique coastal wetlands.
It's important that we protect all of these lakes, the rivers, the creeks, the streams, and because if we don't do it now, it's going to be too late.
My vision for the estuaries of Lake Superior is someday achieving some national recognition in terms of the designation of a National Estuary Research Reserve here in Lake Superior Basin.
It would be the death knell for all these coastal wetlands if all of a sudden the nation started tapping into the freshwater resources of Lake Superior and kept it at the same level all the time. These coastal wetlands require fluctuation. It's a natural process.
We'll continue to maintain the facilities to allow people to use the islands, but at the same time we want to protect some of the wilderness qualities that attract people out here.
It's just connected to so many other cool areas and I'm not alone in this. A lot of people feel that connection.
Estuaries and rivers on Lake Superior is that they have very good ability to clean and repair themselves if we just do our thing as humans and take care of the water quality in the watershed in the area.
It's also work with landowners to restore the health of the entire watershed, so that what we do down here will in long term remain in good condition.
I think if we can do that, and if we can achieve those goals, then we can look towards the next step, which would be probably starting to restore some of the native species.
The main river will come back, but there's no way for it to come back unless they start way back up at the headwaters and work from there. And the thing is education.
Helping the rest of the nation to see how important, this little spot in the Midwest is, for our nation's economy, our nation's ecology.
And it's right here in our own backyard. And I really hope that we have the foresight to preserve this and save this for our children and the next generations that come, because it's such a unique place.
And we'll hold it as a near and dear place for us as citizens of the state of Wisconsin. And that's a real bright future.
Today, through the leadership of citizens, agencies, and tribes, we are working together to restore and protect these rare treasures. A string of pearls, connected not only by the water, but by the people who cherish them. The stories of these estuaries remind us of how much our past and future are linked to the water and to each other. Yahweh,